So we announced our sustainability working group in February of this year. And it really started at last year's Tech Lab Summit. Brian O'Kelly from Scope 3 was on stage, and Scope 3 is hyper-focused on measurement of carbon in this ecosystem. And you know, we made a commitment at that point on stage with Brian to be more active in delivering a greener industry, a greener digital advertising industry. So we kicked off the sustainability working group in February of this year. In less than 4 months, we have just shy of about 90 company members in the sustainability working group. And then on June 7th at Tech Lab Summit this year, fast forward almost a year to the date from when we made the commitment on stage to do something about this, we released the sustainability playbook. So it's been a really impressive coming together of multiple constituents, advertisers, ad tech companies, media companies, globally. The Sustainability Working Group has constituents from across the globe. To see everyone come together so quickly and deliver a viable, practical playbook around what are some of the practical things we can do as an industry that is not a heavy level of effort to deliver a greener supply chain in digital advertising.
So 2 questions for you. One, is that playbook sort of available on the website? And then 2, what are maybe 1, 2 or 3 of sort of those sort of very simple practical things that it recommends?
Sure, so you can download it from the IAB Tech Lab website. It is on the homepage, so it's not hard to find. And I think if you look up sustainability playbook in a search engine, you'll find, I think it's the top hit on the search engine. So it's not difficult to find. Some of the low-hanging fruit that we think is really easy for companies to adopt is this. One is the concept of lazy load. So don't make an impression call until the impression opportunity is actually in view, until it is above the fold. There are millions, perhaps even billions of impressions that are still delivered. They may not be counted because they're not in view. You know, we went through the viewability revolution about 5 or 6 years ago, but they're still delivered. They're still processed. And again, every time an impression is processed, that burns carbon. A computer has to process that, which requires cooling and electricity to power the CPU and data centers to run those things. That burns carbon. So lazy load is a concept of don't load the impression until the impression actually comes into view. Don't make an impression call. That's one. And that is literally a checkbox in the ad server. There's not much a publisher needs to do. And really it's incumbent upon the publisher, in some cases the advertiser, to enable that. That's one. Another is the supply chain object that the Tech Lab released about 2.5 years ago. So we created what's called the supply chain object, which tracks hops of an impression, whether it be digital video, CTV, or a display impression. It tracks the hops it traverses through the supply chain of digital advertising. Less hops is better. Again, every time an impression is processed by a partner in the ecosystem, a computer touches that. That requires CPU, that requires cooling, that requires energy. It burns carbon. So leveraging the supply chain object, you know, if brands and advertisers were to demand that out of their supply chain and reporting against that, they could start to take measures to find the most efficient supply paths to access those impression opportunities. So I think that's a relatively, again, low-hanging fruit thing that publishers can do today, but advertisers frankly need to ask for it.
It's interesting though, because there's the sustainability aspect of that, but also almost like a hygiene in terms of your supply partners, right? Like maybe you don't, the more hops there are, and not to say that having multiple partners is not a useful part of the way that the ad chain works, but I wonder how much inefficiency is in there, or are there resellers, or are there sort of bad actors that you sort of can be aware of that you can eliminate by enabling this as well? Absolutely.
The supply chain object, is I like how you called it a hygiene issue. It is. It was originally introduced as part of our anti-fraud initiatives. Typically, the more hops an impression takes, the more likely it's probably fraud.
Right.
You're not getting access to the New York Times through 12 hops.
Right.
It's just not happening. So that's likely not the New York Times. So what we originally introduced as an anti-fraud mechanism really has strong implications from a sustainability perspective. And fraud, I think, work in anti-fraud and sustainability go hand in hand, because not only is fraud, defrauding advertisers, it's ripping off publishers. It also funds very bad actors that take that money and do horrible things with it in other illicit manners. but talk about ultra not green.
Right.
The ad's not being shown to possibly a real human.
Right.
Right. So it's probably the ultimate, fraud is probably the ultimate kind of carbon issue in the ecosystem.
Yeah.
So they really converge. So the supply chain object is meant to track the impression through the supply chain. And again, that doesn't mean, to your point, that there is a purpose and place to have different supply chain partners that curate digital video versus CTV versus display versus mobile app, mobile web inventory. There are places and purposes for those different constituents. There are also reasons where an impression may be processed several times, the same impression through different partners. That's a yield function that publishers often use. Do you need 15 or 20 partners?
Probably.
No, probably not. It's probably a handful of partners that make the most sense. So publishers really need to use that own telemetry that they can get from the supply chain object as well to also manage their curation channels in these ad tech partners.
It's almost like just having the information, then you decide what you want to do with it, but there's no reason to not have that information.
You can't manage what you can't measure.
Then the last question, bringing it kind of back to the sustainability piece, is where does the Tech Lab fit in terms of sustainability? Are you going to set standards around sort of what a sustainable impression is, or are you working with other trade bodies to kind of figure that out?
Working with other trades. We've got a great relationship with Net Zero, the folks over at GARM, the IAB is our sister organization. We're working with other trades. It's not incumbent just on the Tech Lab. It's not incumbent just on the other trades I've mentioned. It's incumbent on the entire industry, other trade organizations beyond who I mentioned, other companies. The IAB Tech Lab works very much it's an open working group. We don't develop things behind closed doors. We've worked with other trade organizations in the past, and I think this is arguably one of the most important initiatives we can work on with other trade organizations. So whether it comes down to best practices, metrics, the holy grail carbon calculator, we're working closely with Net Zero and GARM, particularly on that one. We're not developing a carbon calculator at the Tech Lab. Will we take product requirements and specifications from GARM and Net Zero, IAB, and others to develop one? Tech Lab will happily raise our hand to actually build it and host it for the industry, but we're not developing that in a vacuum. We're doing that in partnership with other trades and the industry.